also on YouTube. So let's hope it works. And I push the record button and we are all set. Thank you for coming back. I see Marietta, Yogi, Amani, Erin. Perfect. I'm so glad that you came back after the little pause. Good. Perfect. Chip, welcome. And thank you so much for accepting to be one of the speakers again at the Childhood Potential Online Montessori Conference. I'm really, really glad you are here. I
Thanks for
always
having
like
me.
your talks, so welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. I will say a few words about you, and of course you can add anything that you wish. You have been a Montessori educator since 95, and you co-authored the book Positive Discipline in the Montessori Classroom alongside Jane Nelson. As a teacher, trainer, and school assistant, you have guided thousands of Montessori teachers and parents in applying the positive discipline through your workshops, through your lectures. You served as a head of school at Damariscotta Montessori, and I hope I
That's
am
pretty good.
pronouncing it
That's, that's
right. Where you also worked as a teacher and a school leader. You hold your AMS certification for early childhood, lower and upper elementary, and you worked as well with adolescent students. What did I forget? What do you want to add? Tell us more.
Oh, I think you covered it. Other than with that experience comes like a ton of mistakes, and that's how we learn, right?
That's true. Actually, today we made a fun mistake also at this conference, and I wanted to apologize for it. We invited everyone for the live talks on the third day for Wednesday. So sorry about that. Sorry for getting two emails like welcoming you to Tuesday live talks and Wednesday live talks. Of course, that email was supposed to go out tomorrow. So sorry about that, and we are learning from our mistakes not to set up emails when we are tired. So, yeah. Chip, we are supposed to talk today about uh, what we never thought we would say as parents, or what we wouldn't do as parents, what we promised to ourselves. And I think it's a really fun topic, or it can be fun topic.
Yeah.
Why did you choose this topic?
Well, I mean, I think for a number of reasons, I I got into this work in the first place. I joke around and say I was sentenced to positive discipline by my boss at the time, and Jane Nelson's offices were not too far up the road from where we started. And one of my experiences that started in the classroom long before I had my own children was having things come out of my mouth that I promised. I was like, I wasn't going to do that. Yeah, and I started sounding like my parents, and luckily I had a nice kind, experienced mentor who said, "Hey, why don't you go take a look into some of this positive discipline stuff?" And what I started to learn is a lot about what I had to unlearn, actually. And I think that's the biggest. It's just no different when we come into a Montessori classroom, right? We have all, if you were raised in a traditional school the way that I was, we have all these old ideas that are really in belief systems that are lodged within us that we don't even realize that we have. And then you enter into a Montessori classroom and you start to do things that aren't effective, or you just don't know what else to do because you're still inexperienced. Well, the same thing happened with behavior that I remember one instance in particular where I was with these um, two young boys that were at our school, and I don't even remember to this day what they did, but I remember how I responded. And I asked the question that it's probably we've all asked before. to one of the students, and that was, why did you just do that? And normally they'll say, well, I don't know, but this is probably the second most popular answer. And this boy Steven says, well, because Greg did it. And these like 7-year-old children. I was out in the Bay Area in California, so my response was geographically accurate, but it was not necessarily appropriate. And I said, well, if Greg jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, would you jump off? Would you follow him? And he just looked at me and said, why would he jump off the Golden Gate Bridge? He was 7. He had no context for that, right? And I just like, I can't believe I just said that. And there were other things that I'm too embarrassed to say that. And so that started my journey in the classroom and began to unlearn things. And then I thought I had it all together. About 7, 8 years later, when I had started having my own children, and when they were infants, I nailed it. Right? It wasn't too difficult. But as they started to get a little bit older, I tell parents when I work with parents that your children are way easier to work with than my own, right? And I started making some of those same mistakes. But it was even, to me, it was worse because you really felt it differently when it's with your own children. And I started doing some of those very same things, lots of lectures, that sort of thing. And it was about as effective as it was with the students, but of course they were my own children. Yeah. So,
So let's start by just asking you, what do you think are the most common things that we can give as an example of the things that we promised ourselves and wouldn't do as parents?
well, I think nagging and yelling are the big ones that most of us say that, we weren't going to do. Punishing is up there, for a lot of us. And also I think a big one for me was nagging and lecturing, and that's just my own personal experience. I mean, I think everybody's got some, depending on their own personal experience, they're going to have their buttons where they said, "Oh, never going to do that." But I grew up with a mom who was pretty permissive, product of the '60s. If you see a hippie single mom from the '60s, my mom met most of those stereotypes, right? And I had a dad who was really a product of the '50s, who was much more authoritarian. And with my mom, I said, uh, I'm not going to nag my kids and give them lectures all the time, because it was the '60s and '70s when I was growing up, and that's the time where everybody stopped trying to hit their kids, and we just talked them to death, right? And so that was a big one for me. And just like I think a lot of us probably identify with this, is that the very thing that I didn't want to do when I was under stress, that's where I went, because I didn't have an alternative. And with my dad, it was definitely more standing back, not, uninvolvement, and not taking time to teach. And I caught myself doing quite a bit of that. But it's amazing how quickly those things start to come back when you don't know what to do. I think, toddlers have a lot to teach us, right? Like, I think one of for those of you who work with toddlers, like, probably the primary tool you have is to very quietly show them what to do rather than what not to do, right? And you do that all day. I was just in a toddler class recently watching, and the teacher was walking behind the child, because he's carrying a tray and almost falling over because their head was so heavy, right? And she was just behind them, guiding them back to the right place, make sure they didn't tip over. And, I think in my perspective, is that, like, that's a lot of what positive discipline does for adults, or anything that we're going to do, is we need a replacement behavior. We need to be shown what to do rather than what not to do, because otherwise it's really easy to start doing a shame cycle, right? I promised myself I wasn't going to do that, and then you beat yourself up and say, I'm never going to do it again. I'm never going to nag the kids again. Well, what are you going to do instead? And that's a big piece that I think I was missing. And I've talked to folks for years who identify with that, like, what do you do instead? And that's the rub.
I was actually asking everyone on the chat here on the Zoom and then also in YouTube, what are your topics? What were the things that you promised to yourself that you will never do or you will never say? when you have kids, and when did you lose this line of thought? Um, Yogi is writing how easy it is as adults to fall back to the modeling we have received. Powerful example of how we have to model a behavior we want to see in our children. We also need examples of what to do. This conference is a good example of learning about what to do next. I'm thinking maybe we can read some of the examples of what either our audience says, or maybe you started with nagging or yelling, and maybe we can give the alternative. What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, we can do both. I'd love to hear what some other folks say, and then I can just jump.
Caroline writes, I wouldn't be permissive or overly strict, but find a good middle ground. Okay, I thought that as well. Okay. Not ever wake them, from Anne. Yogi writes, lectures, natural consequences. I didn't want to punish, says Erin. Erin also wrote, threatening, spanking because I said so, bargaining, bribing, emotional blackmail,
A
from
great
Aileen and Vincent.
and a great term.
Saying no too much rather than tell them the correct behavior. That's the thing I'm guilty of.
Mhm.
Hmm. Do you want to take some of these examples and maybe we
Yeah,
can give the alternatives?
sure. So why don't I'm going to steal Yogi's because I've got so much. I don't know if you lectured when you grew up, Yogi, but I've always said that if there was an Olympics, I would put my mom up there. I don't know that she would get the gold, but I'm sure she would place. Um, and it was so alternatives to to lecturing. Well, I think the first thing to just ask is that if you think back to your own childhood, if you were lectured, did you ever make any significant life decisions for the positive that were based solely on a lecture that was given to you by your parents? And when I ask that, folks can put their answer in the chat box, but I already know what the answers are, and that most of us usually shut down right when adults try to stuff in. We tend to tune out, and uh, one of the tools we use a lot in positive discipline is something we call conversational curiosity questions. We used to call them what and how questions. And it's a great tool to use when you are tempted to lecture. And I love that example because that was probably right up there on my list of things that I wouldn't do. And I was surprised how naturally it came. I've had my teenagers something, say, is this going to be another lecture? And I don't even think I lecture that much, but I mean, that's how strong a response a teenager is going to give to a lecture. And it's, I can tell you from a parent's perspective why I lecture, right? Because it's usually when my kids are making mistakes that I am really uncomfortable with. And this starts when they're really little, and when they get older, it seems like almost overnight, those consequences to their decisions, they become really big, right? So if you have teenagers, you know that like one minute you're trying to figure out a sleepover for them, and then the next minute they're in high school and they're getting in the wrong car with the wrong person, right? And it's overnight, and then so we have all this really good information, and it is good information. Like I think that I was joking around saying, like, if my kids would just listen to me, I could save them so much pain in their life. And but how did I get that wisdom that I've developed? Right? Well, I got it through making a lot of mistakes, right? I got it through making the wrong decision. I got it, and what happens though when I give a lecture is it's likely to be counterproductive. Even if the information is good, it's likely to get shut down. And if you have a teenager, it's likely to be opposite with younger children. They just might shut you down. So instead, actually, this tool called motivational curiosity questions, it's ancient. It's not, that's what we call it now in positive discipline, but it dates back to Socrates. And what he found is that his students learn far more deeply when he asked the right questions versus when he gave the right information. And so all this is a method of Socratic questioning. So it, I'll give you a quick example. When I actually discovered this tool, I shouldn't say discovered it, but when it really resonated with me, I was holding a set of these questions in my hand, in my right outside my kitchen, when my son Quinn was opening up the refrigerator, and I was looking at these curiosity questions, thinking, I've got to use this more often. And at that very moment, Quinn opens up the refrigerator, and I hear the milk slide off of the counter, and it boom, and it hits the ground. It's a glug 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 glug. And I'm holding these questions in my hand, and I look at them, and this lake of milk is now under the refrigerator, the dishwasher. And normally, tone of voice is really important, but I didn't have it in me at that moment. And I was like, Quinn, what happened? And he said, Well, Dad, I spilled the milk. Right. And I said, Well, what do you think would have caused that to happen? And he said, Well, when I reached in, I grabbed it by the cap. And when I pulled it out over the floor, gravity took for it. So he's been lower elementary in the Montessori classroom, so he knew all about gravity. He hit the ground, and he says, I still have the cap. And a lot of times you want to ask a child what they were feeling. I didn't ask them about it. Just didn't ask Quinn about that because I didn't really care about how he felt at that moment. But I did ask him, what did you learn from this? And he said, well, next time I'm totally going to grab it by the handle. And I literally almost like dropped these questions. Like, I cannot believe this. And what I used to say is I would give him a lecture. I would have given him a lecture on about the cost of milk. There's starving people all over the world, right? And something that would have been really highly effective. That costs $4. You don't even get $4 for your allowance. But the truth is that that would have been completely ineffective, right? He wouldn't have heard a word that he said. And the thing that I loved about that whole exchange was it took me about 45 seconds to ask those questions. And I actually told that story for a long time. And when I did, I used to tell it in a way that I said, I would have given him a lecture about all those things. But what I would have missed is I would have really missed the fact that he could put it together himself. And I started using this with all of my children, and I tell you, it's really effective versus a lecture. But what I really love about using Socratic question or curiosity questions is that I learned so much about my children that I wouldn't have known, right? It's supposed to be about them, but for me, it really helped me know. Even today, I still have two teenagers left in the house, and my wife and I will be sitting in bed, getting ready to try to fall asleep, and the teenagers come into our room and sit at the foot of our bed and just talk and talk and talk. I love it and I hate it at the same time because I want to go to sleep, but I still think that curiosity questions are really like they keep the kids talking, and as children move into adolescence, it's so critical to have those conversations going because the very time you don't want your children to stop talking to you, and it's likely that they will when you give lectures. And if you have younger children, if you start this now, it can really make a significant difference in your relationship with your children as you get older. So that's a really long answer to a short question. So you might want to be careful for the next one.
You said that some of the curiosity questions are what happened? How do you feel about it? What ideas, did you take from the situation? Can you give us maybe some more examples of the curiosity questions or Socratic questions?
Sure. How do you feel about that? Um, what do you think you can do to repair this or fix this? If you're going to go back and give yourself some advice, what would you tell yourself? If you were going to, if your brother did the same thing, what would you suggest to him? Yeah. Um, what's your plan going forward? If it involves somebody else, and this is a great question. I love this. Is how are they feeling? You know, what might they be thinking about this situation? One of the key things that there's a lot of talk about building empathy in children. And now, especially with smaller family sizes, neighborhoods, kids not having a lot as much interaction time with each other as they used to. Some of those social skills are not as highly developed, even if it was done a little from a more of a Darwinian, point when we were growing up. But just have with a young child, just looking at somebody say, how might look at his face? What do you think his face might be saying? You know, what do you think he might be feeling? And getting a chance to start to read facial expressions and that sort of thing. Some of the skills that children, um, uh, you know, are tend to be lagging more now than they used to.
Mhm. Okay, so this is about lecturing. You also mentioned nagging.
Yeah,
Do
that's
you
my
have some real life example and a real life solution?
yeah, sure. So that journey for me started in the classroom because I was running around reminding children all the time. And one of my favorite quotes from Jane Nelson is that reminding children is disrespectful. And that it really resonated with me because you know, in the Montessori culture, we actually we do this a lot without realizing it, and we have our own language with it, and we're attempting to be nice and give reminders or what I call redirecting. But one of the things that happens is usually around 4 years old, redirecting really changes. Younger children redirecting or what you call almost distracting is something very different, right? So you might, if a young child is playing with the outlet, you might say, "Hey, why don't you come over here? Let's read a book together." But when kids start to hit around age 4, they start to be able to predict cause and effect, right? And they also start to be able to understand that different people can have a different perspective on reality at the same time. So that's that I know that if my mom sees that um, there's a cookie that's on uh, the counter, right? And I know that we have a dog, right? I might tell a fib or something like that around 4 that starts to happen because I realize that my mother may have a different perception of reality than I have. And until that time, you think everybody, the children, are pretty egocentric. You think that they have the same perspective as you. So what happens when we start to redirect children and they are starting to figure it out and they realize that maybe you think that they don't know, right? It can actually start a manipulation cycle. And so like in a Montessori classroom and even with Montessori parents, you tend to hear, "Oh, why don't you come over here and try this?" Or "Why don't you come over here and try that?" But they know that they might have maybe violated a social norm or a family rule or a classroom ground rule. And so when the adult comes in to redirect, what they're doing around age 4 is they're actually giving kind of a reminder, and it's just a nice way of nagging the child. And that can st that starts to a manipulation cycle, right? When I realize, oh, she doesn't really realize that and so what Dr. Montessori told us to do is we always use the least words sufficient for the task, right? So what I did as a new parent and as also as a new teacher, a lot of times was do those reminders, those nags. It wasn't effective. I got a lot of negotiation. And instead, uh, one of the things that you can do is actually use fewer or no words. And then what you do is you can just follow through with what are called presence, warmth, and silence, right? So let's say the cookie's on the counter and I'm not supposed to eat the cookie, and I start to take the cookie, and my mom's got a choice right there. Does she remind me that I shouldn't have the cookie before dinner and we're not allowed to eat before dinner? Or she could potentially just come up to me and say, I noticed that you're starting to take the cookie before dinner, and then and just give a knowing smile, presence, warmth, and silence, and just wait for and wait for the follow through. That is way easier said than done, but it was that one approach when I was a classroom teacher, it changed everything for me in the classroom. Um, because what I was having the most difficulty, and I hear a lot of this from parents as well, is I was having difficulty having the children follow through with what they knew they were supposed to do, right? So this is a tool for follow through that you use when children know what to do and they know how to do it. And you're tempted to redirect, to remind, to nag them, to, take your dishes off the table. But instead, we could just say dishes. And then to any pushback or questions, remember, you know that they know, right? So you kind of give them that look that says, I know that you know that I know, and I trust that you're going to follow through. And you don't go anywhere. You stay right there. So a lot of times people ask, does this work with adolescents and older children? Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think it would be a desert island tool. If I was to be put on a desert island with a bunch of teenagers, I would definitely want to have this at my disposal. I work with teenagers as a teacher, my own children. As a matter of fact, my children will still say, Dad's doing that quiet thing again. Right. So my son, I don't know if he'll ever, Peter, I don't know if he'll ever learn to by himself empty the dish drainer, but it drives me nuts when he doesn't do it. And his job is to do the dishes. So what I usually do is just go over and I just quietly hand him the dish drainer and I don't say anything. And sometimes he'll roll his eyes. Dad's doing that quiet thing again. Yeah. But it was a lifesaver because I will talk and I will remind and I will coax and I will nag. And I do it with a nice tone of voice because I'm a Montessori teacher, but it has the same effect. So that's an alternative to nagging.
I have a question here on Zoom. Just confirming this approach works best for kids around 4 and older. You just confirmed teenagers, so
Yeah. So I would say you could start depending on you have to take temperature of your child. So I could say you could start using presence, warmth, and silence at around 2.5 to 3. Um, it's one of those tools though that if you make a mistake, if the child's too young, you're not going to do any harm, right? I like my son Nicholas one time. It was speaking of taking the dishes off the table. From the time the children were about 2, they would take their dishes off the table with the older children. Um, he didn't do it that day. He was about 2.5, and he was upstairs near his bedroom. And I looked up the stairs and I said, Nicholas, your dish is still on the table. And then and he just looked back at me, and we just had a nice moment. He didn't understand the nonverbal communication that was happening, and that was fine. And said, "Oh, it's time to come take your dish off the table." And we went together, right? So we just had a nice moment, and it's not going to do any real harm because you want to make sure that all three of those things are in place. Presence, meaning you stay in proximity for the follow through. All right. Many of you might have done that, just yell dinner time, right? And do the kids ever come? No. So it'd be helpful just to go to them and just say it's dinner time and just stay there until they come, right? So presence, proximity, and then warmth. That's a big one. Like I have a 3-year-old, and when I approach her and she's got such a radar. When she feels that I'm a little bit frustrated, this tool doesn't work. Like it'll fall apart right there. But so I have to come up, see what she's doing, sit down with her for a second, and then follow through. So there's a warmth exchange, so connection before correction, right? And then finally is the silence. Um, the first one who talks loses, right? And so that's an old sales technique, but it's really true here. As long as you know that the child knows what they're supposed to do and they know how to do it. If you're not sure, it's probably not the tool to use, right? They probably need to take time to go through it and to teach it and understand what the expectation is. So, yeah.
Perfect. Uh, another thing that we mentioned is being too permissive. Maybe, do you want to tell us why it's bad and what to do instead?
Sure. It was really interesting. I was just talking about this earlier today. The teacher that I was coaching, and they were talking about a child who was coming from a permissive home, and she said, I think I did something where I just might have made a mistake, and she explained something that was she thought was a little more punitive, and but she said, but when he came back from where I sent him, he just seemed really calm and like he wanted me to do what I did. And I really identify with that experience. Um, there's probably a better way to do what she did that made her feel better, would have been maybe more helpful to the relationship. However, I can tell you from personal experience from growing up in a permissive household that sometimes children interpret a lack of follow through and a lack of firmness as uncaring, right? When I was in high school, I actually rebelled from a lot of that permissiveness, and it took me a year to beg my parents to send me to military school, right? And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Also explains that why when I'm under stress, I can sometimes go to authoritarianism, but that's another story. Um, when I went to military school, it gave me structure and predictability, and I knew what the rules were, and right, and so um, those things are important too. I mean, obviously, what military school lacks is the warmth and the support, and that you'd want in a family. But what I have, what with permissiveness, usually the adult has their best intentions, right? It's just my intentions might not always, lead to being super effective. So with permissiveness, we don't always know how the child is going to receive and interpret what that actually means. Some kids might feel loved by it, and they move into an environment where it's more firm, and they might feel unloved in that environment. Other children like me might feel like, hey, these people don't care enough to set rules for me, and this feels pretty unsafe without boundaries. So one of the things is you see a lot is that and um, the adult trying to be nice, hoping that the children are going to be nice back, right? That's not connection before correction. That's more permissiveness, right? And it can cause children to feel insecure. So a few things that are really in terms of if you lean to be more permissive that you can do that I think are baby steps towards being more firm. Because a lot of times, again, if you're more permissive, you're worried. It's really important for your children to feel loved and accepted and supported. So some baby steps are start beginning to involve them into starting to set some of those limits with them, right? Having a family meeting. And so if there's maybe you're having a hard time getting out the door in the morning, create a routine with the children, not for them, not creating a flow chart for them and hanging it on the refrigerator and asking them to follow it. Then they'll wind up being frustrated with the fact that they didn't follow it. But if you loop them into the situation, you're creating those guidelines together, and then it's much easier to follow through. And that's where you could use like presence, warmth, and silence. And the idea there, the concept that Jane Lynn came up with is they called it routine. Let routines be the boss, right? Rather than you being the boss. So with the children, you create routines, you create guidelines, and then when you follow through, it's much easier. You know that they know what to do. You've set them together. And if the child pushes back at that point, you can say, great, well, we can revisit that at the family meeting, but for now, we're going to stick to this. And we nice and quiet. So involving children can be a really nice step towards that. Um, and then the another big one is making sure sometimes children, if you're in a more permissive environment, um, there's an assumption that children already know how to do a lot of things, right? And so taking time to actually teach children how um, to go about doing some of the things that we're going to expect with them, that lowers their that raises their resilience as they make mistakes. You're coming from a place of teaching and support rather than just coming down authoritarian. The truth is with permissiveness is that you don't always stay there either. It's really hard because some of the behaviors that get manifested in a permissive environment, well, I don't know how else to say this, but they're annoying and irritating, right? So the adults start to lose their patience with the children, and then they slide down into a more authoritarian mode because they're frustrated, and it becomes really inconsistent. And the same thing can happen if you start off too authoritarian. So anyway, as just a couple of things involving children and creating routines and guidelines, using that presence, warmth, and silence, and then you know yeah, and just following through.
Now I would like to ask everyone if you have questions, please drop them in the chat on the Zoom and on YouTube. And I have a question.
Mhm.
What's one myth about positive discipline that you often find yourself needing to correct?
Well, that it's that it's permissive. I think Jane would even say that she might change the title of positive discipline if she had to go back and do it over again. Because a lot of times people read positive discipline and they assume that it's like it's just rewarding, it's permissive. There's for discipline to be effective, it really needs to be both kind and firm at the same time. Children need support, they need love, they need warmth. They also need follow through. They also need high expectations, and that's something that people misunderstand about positive discipline. Is that it lacks expectations, but it's if done well, it should be the firmness should be there too. And I think that's really important for wherever you tend to lean. If you tend to lean more authoritarian or more permissive, the nice thing is that those tools they give the person who tends to lean more permissive the security that they're going to be providing that warmth and love to their children while still being firm. And to the person who tends to be more authoritarian, like me, it ensures that there's going to be responsibility uh, and structure that's in there as well.
Aushra is asking, what is the alternative to yelling? Is it Socrates' method again?
So, well, there's a lot of alternatives to yelling. Just first of all, lower your voice. You could try that. Um, so I think let me just speak from personal experience because I don't want to come across like there's some objective truth to this. The biggest uh, approach towards avoiding yelling for me has been the family meeting. Uh, a lot of times if I feel like I'm going to be, I don't really do much of it at all. I haven't for years, but when I was in that spot, it was because I had expectations out of a situation that weren't being met. Sometimes it came out of embarrassment. If I was in public and my children were misbehaving, I would be embarrassed. I would take that personally. Um, and when I just saw something as outright defiance, right? Now I underline that what I saw as outright defiance. A lot of times the kids weren't really being defiant, but I perceived it that way. And those were some of my triggers. But I think regardless of what those triggers are for you, the family meeting is probably one of the most important things, benefits to my family and positive discipline. Because what happens in that structure, and there is a structure to it, is that we meet weekly to solve problems, and the kids can bring up problems, the adults can bring up problems. And there's some really interesting research that shows that, and it's around marriage, and that is that uh, after a few years, the thing that really keeps intimacy and togetherness in a marriage is that the is conflict, and that getting through that conflict and resolving those problems together builds builds one of the primary, builds intimacy like nothing else. And I think the same thing, again, I didn't do research on this, but that's been my experience in the family. My children still will say when they watch other people's families operate, why don't they just get together and talk about that? Why don't they just get together and figure that out? When they moved into not a public school, but a more traditional environment in high school, they did not understand why they couldn't just work something out with their teacher, right? And and it was one of those things like, look, they're old enough they can learn how to navigate that. I trusted they'll figure that out. I didn't need to come to the rescue. But it was one of those things like I'm glad that they thought that they found that to be surprising, right? It means that, and I don't want to take full credit of that. If any of you who've worked in a Montessori school and had children in a Montessori school, even if you're a Montessori teacher, it's a really humbling experience because you realize that what's happening at school, you couldn't do what you're doing at home without it, right? And I think they learned that at school as well through class meetings. So I think great alternative to yelling is family meetings.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how to organize a family meeting?
Sure, I can do it pretty quickly. It won't do it justice. If you're not familiar with the Jane's original book, Positive Discipline, she's a really nice, right? She talks really well, fantastically about how to do a family meeting in there. But essentially, it's the same thing that happens in a class meeting, and that is that it starts with something. It's basically it's a sandwich. It starts with something positive and connective, and it ends the same way. And in the middle, we solve problems together. So it usually starts with taking time for compliments and appreciations. We just did a club family meeting last night, and we took time. My daughter's 3. She just says thank you. She and goes on to somebody else. And the teenagers, obviously, it's really nice to hear teenagers say something nice about you, to be completely selfish. And the other thing that it really forces you to do is it makes you start to think critically about what people have done to contribute. So if you're in that family structure and maybe you're a little discouraged as a parent, like things don't seem to be going the way you want to, and then you're forced to think about something that your partner or one of the kids have contributed. There's nothing that gets you out of that negative thinking, like giving and receiving compliments or appreciations. And those tend to be, ideally, they should be direct to the other person, have meaning, real meaning, and they should be as specific as possible. So not just like when the kids were younger, they were basically gave me a lot of thanks for putting food on the table, which is nice. But now it's very different. They'll thank me for helping them paint their room or something like that. So it starts with something connective, the compliments and appreciations, and then we usually will review a problem that we've done in the past. That way, if it's not working, we can fix it. Or if it is working, we can celebrate a little bit. Then we kind of dig into the meat. We basically we take turns sharing difficulties and we work together to come up with solutions. The nice thing about reviewing those problems each time is that it takes the pressure off of doing it perfectly the first time. Yeah. So if you blow it, right, like you create a routine with the family and it just isn't working, well, we can always go back and fix it, right? It was the way we started. Mistakes are an opportunity to learn. And one of the neat things that happens is that I think it teaches the children how to and us how to be, each difficulty we run into in the family, um, it's not the end of the world, right? We have a place we can fix this. And so anyway, the last part of the meeting we usually end some in our family we end with jokes sometimes, which I was like. Sometimes we have those. You ever see those cards where you ask those questions? I forgot, what they called. We're like, if you had to bring 3 books in a desert island, what would you bring? Do something like that, and then we'll play a game or something after. So that's the family meeting structure, and it usually happens, once a week. Occasionally, we might schedule another one if we haven't finished talking about something important, but it's just a weekly ritual that we do together. And one thing, you ever try this, just make sure that as the adults, that the percentage of problems, it's fairly even between the adults and the children. If you find yourself putting problems on there all the time, you can imagine what that message that sends to the children. It'll just become a lecture hall. If it's all the kids, then we might, be breeding a sense of entitlement, right? So it's a back and forth. It's a horizontal relationship that we're trying to develop there.
Thank you. There are a few questions about smaller children, toddlers. Danielle here on Zoom is asking about a 2.5-year-old. On YouTube, we have a question from Joe Foster about 16 months. So, is there something that you would like to say about the toddlers when it comes probably to, I would say discipline because the questions came before the family meeting? Ah, you are muted. Sorry. I was lost. Sorry. Uh, Ask to unmute. Try now.
Perfect. I
Perfect. Sorry.
muted, I muted myself because there's a distracting
Yes.
noise. Can you hear that? Okay.
No, not at all.
So with toddlers, obviously, I don't know if this came from the topic of the family meeting. If it did, in terms of family meeting, we just kept the toddlers around. I have 5 children, so there for a long time there was always a toddler around, and they were just around in the area. My belief is they can pick up on that energy. And you know, it's nice if you have more children because the younger ones start to follow the older ones. With younger toddlers, just some basic tools to use. A lot of this is where you do want to do a lot of redirection, showing them what to do versus what not to do, um, and being as routine oriented as possible, as possible. If there's a set of human beings that are likely to throw you off your routine in the world, it's going to be toddlers or teenagers. So the struggle is real. So I think those would be the major tools. Basically, redirection, distraction, and a lot of supervision. That's one of the ones I think I've even seen in toddler classrooms that sometimes adults will forget is that, toddlers, they're built to explore, and they don't know danger from not danger yet. So it looks like they're trying to kill themselves a lot of times when really they're just trying to explore the world. And you just want to be cautious, you know, and proactive with supervision. Uh, they can hurt themselves, just even in the classroom. Like one of the most effective things with toddlers who are biting is just to be around them so that you can save them from themselves, right? Before they bite someone else.
Mhm. I go to another question. Uh, how do we help our grandparents not do the same to our own kids?
That's
Try
a
to always stop it and explain why they shouldn't do it, but still, grandparents.
well, I'm going to just give you my own experience on this, and folks are welcome to disagree. This is not the official uh, line, but my mother attended a positive discipline workshop at our school when because she was going to be watching the kids she lived close by. Um, I love the fact that she went and did it. It didn't take, right? And you know what this is just my own wisdom experience, and you know I think one of the things to remember with grandparents is even if you're in a multi-generational home, the primary influences on your children are you, right? And you can model for your parents, and they have a different relationship with them. They're their grandparents. And I think a lot of times what happened, well, again, this is what happened for me is especially in the beginning with my oldest children, I began to assume that my parents were going to have the same impact on my children as they had on me. And it's just not the case. Like my grandmother one time said something horrific to me, right? She compared me to my cousin, right? I remember it because I was confused by it, right? If my mom had said the same thing, it would have been devastating to me, but it really didn't have the same impact. So my approach is, you know, was to try to work with my mom as much as possible because she was around quite a bit as my children were growing up, and to accept the fact she grew up in a different era. She had different values. She's going to treat my children differently. And I accepted that as part of their life experience, and that I have m most of the influence on my children's lives. And if and my mom would often ask me because I modeled rather than tried to get her to do what I asked her to do. She would oftentimes ask me what it was that I was doing because it seemed effective. So,
That's
and
nice.
yeah.
Question from Erin. Is there any importance to teaching children social norms, even if you don't care about those socially acceptable or unacceptable behaviors?
There's a lot to that question. So if I understand correctly, it's the parent is not so concerned with the social norm, but there's probably some concern that they're not teaching by not teaching the child the social norms, they might have a difficult time navigating.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I think the answer is actually in the question there, right? So the purpose of social norms is to teach a child how to navigate something successfully. I mean, if it violates your values, which every family is going to have that experience, right? Like, I mean, I ran a school, and there were some things that happened in my own school, and I was the one who was in charge in a particular classroom where there was a social norm that the teacher was perpetuating that I didn't necessarily agree with, and so my approach to that was is that well that's the norm that's in the classroom, you know, and if there was something to talk about where maybe our values as the family were a little different, we would talk about that. But in that environment, I think it's fair to teach them how to navigate that, and it's our job in the home to develop our children's consciousness. Yeah.
Thank you. Erin, was it helpful?
Yeah.
And Daniel is asking, what age does the sense of danger kicks in for toddlers?
I would say it's late, it's later twos and into threes where they really start to have a greater understanding. Children understand cause and effect. They're approaching 4 years old. Yeah. And and until then, they're going to be making more mistakes. Um, but you know, the truth is that there's some level of cause and effect from the time that children are infants. And it's just how far that develops in their consciousness, right? Because a child learns to cry naturally when they're hungry and they get in it. So there is some cause and effect there. But in terms of danger, um, where it's absolutely conscious, where they see something and they can predict that something bad is going to happen if they do that, that's that takes place between later twos to 2 to 4.
Mhm. Another question, I think last one, maybe last two. Let's see. In our family, aggression isn't our way of treating others. However, in a world with bullies, can I make her the victim because I don't allow her to fight back?
Oh gosh. So I'm laughing because I've been there, and I don't want to be controversial about this, but I do think that it is it's a really great quality. I'll just answer this with a story. Um, my son was he's about 10 or 11 years old, and there was a kid in the classroom who was doing what I would call real deal bullying behavior. And I don't like to paint the behavior with a broad brush, because bullying means to me means something very specific. But in my estimation, that this is what was happening. There was a power dynamic, and the whole relationship was about the power dynamic, and some really hurtful things were happening. And one day when he was out on the playground, my son punched him, and he punched him in the face. And when he came, he obviously had got sent to my office. I was the principal, right? And it was a tough thing to navigate, because internally I was not happy that he hit somebody for a lot of reasons, not the least of which because I was the principal. But I didn't want him to learn how to solve a problem that way. And I was also thrilled with the fact that he felt like he didn't deserve to be treated that way, and then he would stick up for himself, right? So I'm a big believer in being really honest about, and that's what I told him. And I would have said that to any student in the classroom, in the school. I would say, I can never condone you hurting somebody. I'm really happy that you feel like you didn't deserve to be treated that way. And in terms of bullies, one of the most effective things to do is to stand up to them, right? They tend to wilt pretty quickly, because behind that is a deep insecurity. Rudolph Dreicher said a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. And some of the most hurt, wounded kids that I've dealt with exhibited bullying behavior. And on the other side, and underneath that is usually something. A lot of times it could be really sensitive and tender, and really hurt. And those children often, hurt people, right? And but you don't want to give your child that information and excuse the other child's behavior to give them compassion. And I forgot what that Stockholm syndrome, right? We don't want that to happen by having them just feel sorry for the child's hurting them, maybe have some understanding. But I think first and foremost is, validating a child's desire to stick up for themselves, understanding that you are going to meet people who are going to be aggressive that way in your life. So it's also a really opportune time to learn when you're younger how to deal with that. And I think a lot of us have had those experiences growing up. And if anybody, some of these are entering into my opinion. And so if anybody disagrees with that and they want to throw it in the chat box, you're welcome to do that. This is, we're having this as a conversation for a reason.
Yeah, I agree. Perfect. Chip, is there anything else that you would like to say, mention, that you want to be heard?
No, we're about to wrap up, but I think the one thing that if I had a wish, a magic wand, I could just tap. Like, there's different things, having been in this work for a while, that you get to see cycles, parenting and teaching. And if there's one tool that I wish that would be more widely used and understood now, it's natural consequences. And we were. I have the opportunity to work with a lot of teachers, and when we talk about some of the things that they're seeing, one of the most frequent is a lack of resilience in young children. And I think that a lot of that is because and this is purely from a parent's perspective, and definitely United States centric, but I understand that this is happening all over the world. But I'll speak for where I live, and that is that there's there seems to be an unwritten rule in parenting that's established, that's come in the last 15 years, and that is that if you allow your child to experience any bit of discomfort or disappointment or or suffering in any way, um, then you're doing it wrong. You're bad. You're a bad parent. And and I've experienced that. There's a peer pressure that's on parents now that didn't used to be there. Recently we were, I let my daughter fall off of a climbing structure, intentionally. It was only a foot or two off the ground into some wood chips. And I got a glare from these parents that like I thought they were going to call child protective services on me, right? But how on earth is she going to learn to be careful if she doesn't have a fall, right? So that's a natural consequence. It means you just allow the consequence to happen, or you allow a child to get cold if they don't have their jacket on. And if children don't get a chance to struggle sometimes, they also don't get a chance to realize how capable they are about solving problems and overcoming some of those struggles. You need those struggles to become resilient and strong and feel capable and have a sense of efficacy in the world. And so that would be my magic. If I had a wish or a magic wand, that we would get back to being okay with allowing children to have some challenges and to have some difficulties, not take it personally, and and just provide them with the guidance to get through it rather than trying to um, make sure that we snowplow away every challenge. So yeah. And somebody else said in the chat box to be happy. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. Uh, Comment from Yogi. A solution-focused approach teaches children skills they can use to manage themselves when we are not with them. Resilience grows when children learn how to solve problems and think in ways that support themselves and others. Learning from natural and logical consequences, especially when solutions are explored together, helps children build confidence, responsibility, and trust in their own abilities. Thank you for today's session.
Yeah. And if you don't know, Yogi's a positive discipline trainer and been working with Montessori for years. And thank you for all your wonderful comments and throughout the talk. Yogi, is wonderful having you here and your encouragement. Yeah.
And Yogi also has her own session at the conference, so everyone is welcome to watch her session as well. Let me check on which day. I don't see it. Ah, it was yesterday. Sorry. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Chip. Thank you for
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks,
accepting,
everyone.
to be one of the speakers. Thank you very much. And now I want to do just one little thing because we promised in our mailing, we promised that who is going to share forward email, put us in the copy. We will choose one person who will get a VIP pass today. So let me just share my screen and do the draw because I want you to see what, hold on, not share yet. How I'm choosing that I'm not making it up. Okay, so I'm sharing. You see the wheels of names. This is like all of the people who were sharing the conference just through an email when they signed in, and uh, and I will just click, and let me just choose one person, and we will send them the VIP pass today, tonight or tomorrow. Ginny. Perfect. Okay, so let me make a screenshot so I have it. Okay, and just a quick reminder that the VIP pass price is going up tonight. It's not for the people who are here on Zoom because you already have the VIP experience, but for everyone who is watching us on YouTube, please come and join us. It not only supports the existence of the conference, but it also gives you so many benefits, different bonuses from the speakers, from our other partners. So welcome, join us. It will support us as well. Okay, and tomorrow, let me still share the topics for tomorrow so you can be excited as I am. Tomorrow it will be with Devon Kutzman about setting limits, even when your child yells no, and with Sylvia Artin about building resilience and preparing your child for today's world. And I think both of the ladies are amazing speakers, and I can't wait for their presentations. So I will see you tomorrow. We start a little later. We start half an hour ago from now at 8 of my time. I don't know what your times are, but we are starting a little later because Sylvia is in Australia, so she will be getting up very early to give you the talk. And yeah, I will see you tomorrow. And Chip, again, thank you so much for being here for your
My
talk.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
And perfect. And to all of you who were here, who are live here, it's amazing to yeah, to see your faces here on Zoom and to read your comments. It means a world. And to a few of our speakers who are here, Amy Williams, Yogi. So thank you for being here and for your support. Perfect. Well, then I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow you will get the Wednesday afternoon email again. And I hope I will see you in a nice number like today. Okay. Hey. Bye
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.